a car crash? Alright, I'm on my way. I'm an EMT, and I'm on the scene of the crash. My spouse and the lover I didn't know about are both gravely injured. What do I do?
Wow, what an awful situation. Now the EMT must make a decision, but how will he do so? Now, to repeat the question, you're an EMT on the scene of a car crash that involves your spouse and the lover you didn't know she had. They are both gravely injured. Your spouse's injuries are the worst of them. You can tell it's unlikely she will pull through. Meanwhile, her lover has a neck injury that will prove fatal if pressure is not applied soon. Whom do you choose to work on? After hearing this question, you may be thinking, oh, I should have two options. I either choose the spouse or I choose the lover I didn't know she had. Obviously, the spouse option sounds a lot better. Though this is not the reality. The reality is that you must make a decision that is correct and ethical. Through the three moral acts, the principle of double effect, and things such as your Christian conscience, it is obvious that you can make this decision. So I will be talking about these elements, and afterwards, Miles and Constantine will be solving the question. Continuing on, what is Christian conscience? Christian conscience is a judgment of reason by which the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act. Man has in his heart a law inscribed by God. His conscience is man's most secret core and his sanctuary. When judging an action, it is important that we use our Christian conscience, though there are also more in-depth ways to determine an act, if conscience isn't enough. So now I'll be moving into more in-depth ways to determine an act. So now we have three parts to a moral act. God has given us freedom to choose and make decisions through him. Therefore, for every action, it is important that Christians take into account the moral acts. Every moral act contains three elements. The first two are primary considerations, and the final element is a secondary consideration. Firstly, we have the objective of the act, what we do. Secondly, the intention of the act, why we do the act. Finally, we must consider the circumstance of the act, when, where, how, who. Firstly, an act must be objectively good for an individual act to be morally good. Some actions are always bad because they go against a fundamental or basic human value that should never be compromised, regardless of the intention or reason for performing them. Direct slaughter of the innocent, torture, and rape are only a few examples of always wrong behaviors. Such acts are referred to as intrinsically evil acts, which means that they are wicked in and of themselves, regardless of why they are carried out or the conditions in which they occur. Secondly, there's the part of the moral act that resides with the person's purpose, end, or intention. For a moral act to be good, the intention of the moral act must also be good. Our actions are morally evil if they are motivated by a wrong intention, even if the aim is objectively good. It's also important to remember that a good intention cannot make a bad action, something intrinsically evil, good. Also, we can never do anything bad or evil in order to achieve something positive. This is what the phrase, the end does not justify the means. Finally, circumstance. Circumstance increases or decreases the moral goodness or evil of human acts. For example, the consequences of stealing from someone might be aggravated or mitigated depending on the amount stolen, what you stole, and where or who you stole it from. Though, circumstance cannot make an evil act good, as things such as stealing are always evil regardless of the circumstance. On the other end of things, circumstance can make a good act evil. Now I'll be moving on into the principle of double effect. The principle of double effect comes into play when a moral act has both a good and an intrinsically evil effect that cannot be separated. This principle allows us to determine if such an act may be chosen without falling into sin. These conditions for the principle of double effect were provided by Joseph Magnan and will help to further understand this principle. Firstly, that the action in itself from its very object be good or at least indifferent. Secondly, that the good effect and not the evil effect be intended. Third off, that the good effect be not produced by means of evil. Fourth, that there be proportionality in that the evil cannot be greater than the good to be achieved. Finally, agents must strive to minimize the foreseen harm. Next, Miles will be analyzing some of the concepts that I discussed and applying them to the question of the car crash. For example, he may be discussing the principle of double effect and 3 parts to a moral act.
The first principle of practical reasoning means to do good and avoid evil. As a human being, we discover this command in our conscience. It is the Spirit of God within us, guiding us to make good decisions and avoid all evil. Before committing an action of some sort, the first principle of practical reasoning allows us to comprehend whether the action fits human nature or does not. It is important to understand if the action does fit human nature, it is seen to be a good action, and if the action doesn't fit human nature, it is seen to be a bad action. Now I will relate this to the case. This decision made by the EMT on the scene would be a very hard decision, and honestly, I believe that most people in the situation would still try and save their spouse instead of the lover you didn't know your spouse had. I'm going to explain why in fact this is not the right thing to do. For example, let's just say you were an EMT on the scene and you didn't know that your spouse's injury was so bad that he or she wouldn't pull through. The choice was between your spouse or your lover's significant other. You would obviously try and save your spouse first, and that is the right decision and completely okay. You put family first, and any person in the right mind would do the exact same thing if presented this difficult task. Though, if we go back to the original case, knowing that your lover is very unlikely to pull through, it changes the whole dynamic of the situation. Even though your conscience will be all over the place and the decision will be extremely hard to make, the right thing to do is try and save your spouse's significant other. Using the first principle of practical reasoning, you are doing a good action by saving someone's life, rather than doing the action that doesn't fit human nature, which would be letting your spouse's lover die when you are able to save them. The 8 basic goods are the basic aspects of human well-being. We should follow all these basic goods because it helps us live our best possible lives to the fullest extent. No single good is valued more or worse. No single good is better than the other. Basic goods also help us determine what an action is and offers a structure for thinking about what human well-being is all about. These 8 basic goods are categorized into 2 sections: substantive goods and reflexive goods. In no particular order, the 4 substantive goods are life, speculative knowledge, aesthetic beauty, and sport. The first substantive good, life, promotes life, health, creation, and sacredness of life. For example, taking medicine if you are sick is helping you get healthier, promoting your life. Speculative knowledge means the pursuit of truth, beauty, truth for its goodness, and for its own sake. For example, if your friend is in need of help with fixing his boat, and you obtain the knowledge to fix that boat, tell your friend the truth and help him fix his boat for his own goodness sake. Aesthetic beauty means appreciating beauty, grace, talent, music, art, sports, etc. Life is short and we should appreciate those beautiful things life has to offer. Lastly, sport means skilled performance, playing games, sports, and doing all activities. Getting out there and having fun, especially playing sports, whether it's competitive or not, helps you live your best life. In relation to this case, the substantive goods that play a part are life and speculative knowledge. Life plays a major role because the EMT's spouse and spouse's secret lover are both fighting for their lives. The lives of these two are at stake, and trying to save whoever in this case is promoting life. Therefore, you're doing this basic good. Knowledge, I would say, plays the biggest factor in this case scenario. You obtain the knowledge that your spouse's injuries are the worst of them, and you can tell it's unlikely he or she will pull through, as well as obtaining the knowledge that the other injured fellow is your spouse's secret lover. Knowing this truth makes your decision very difficult, especially when there's someone's life in your hands. Now on to reflexive goods. The 4 reflexive goods are integrity, authenticity, friendship, and religion. Firstly, integrity means harmony with self, dealing with balance and inner peace. Having integrity is a very important self-trait. People with integrity have strong moral principles. Authenticity means harmony with action. Actions confirm character. You are consistent in approach. Being authentic means you're a genuine, legit human being who is trustworthy and can be relied on. Friendship means harmony with others. Justice, peace, kind heart resolves tensions. Having a strong friendship with someone you can always count on is very important. It is critical to understand that you are who your friends are. Stick around with those who want the best and care for you. The 4th reflexive good is religion. Religion in this case means harmony with the higher being, God. Relationship to higher being, sense of higher purpose and meaning in life. God is always watching and is guiding us to make the right decisions. It is crucial you have faith in God, because when times get hard, God is there to protect and help no matter what the situation. The first principle of morality means one cannot damage, destroy, or impede a basic good, even in pursuit of another good. If an action is in accordance with a basic good, then it is good. If an action goes against the basic good, then it is a bad action. This principle is very straightforward and has a big effect on this case scenario. At this point, I have proven why the right thing to do is attempting to save your spouse's lover. I will explain this by using the principle of morality. Attempting to save your spouse's life would go against the basic good of knowledge, integrity, and life. You have the knowledge that your spouse will unlikely pull through, yet you make the decision to put her first over someone else's life you can actually save. You are going against integrity because you're not being honest, nor having strong moral principles with yourself. Lastly is life. Though this can be controversial because you are still attempting to save someone's life, this is not the case. Let's forget the fact that this is your spouse's life you are trying to save. Let's say the person you decide to save is just a regular person. You understand that the other person needs aid and that he will survive if you put pressure on his fatal wound. Yet you are helping someone who will unlikely pull through. It wouldn't make sense, would it? Therefore, you are not promoting life by doing this. You're promoting life by helping the victim who can actually survive if you put pressure on the fatal wound. Like I had mentioned, if one action goes against the basic good, it is a bad action. Because of these reasons, we can see why saving your spouse's lover is the right thing to do.
This scenario is a very hard spot for an EMT to be put in. While they know what to do and have trained for situations just like this, I'm sure there is still a ton of shock when you arrive on the scene of a horrific accident, just like this one. This is also not to mention that the EMT in this scenario has just found out that his wife has been cheating on him with another man. While in the moment of finding this out, you will definitely have initial reactions that would leave you hurt, shocked, and disgusted. That doesn't mean that as an EMT, you can or should ignore your job. In the moment, you have a few choices that you can make. You could try and save your wife, possibly in hopes that you could reconcile things with her. You could also try to save your wife's secret lover, because that is what you've been trained to do. While the EMT has to make a split-second decision on what to do in this situation, we here can take a closer look at the bigger picture and analyze which choice is correct and how you could come to that conclusion. No matter what decision the EMT ends up making here, what is important for us to look at is the 3 parts to a moral act. Within any act, there are going to be 3 parts. 2 primary considerations, followed by a secondary consideration. When the EMT decides who he's going to attempt to save first, he has his primary considerations. After his second primary consideration comes his secondary consideration, which in this case is most likely him double-checking and confirming with himself that he's doing what he feels is correct and what he wants to do. The way to tell whether the choice that the EMT makes is good or not is by 3 different qualifications. The first is the object of the action and the goodness that it produces. Asking questions like how do the EMT's actions affect the other people involved will help you come to the conclusions on this first qualification and whether it was good or not. The second qualification and way to tell that whether an act is good or not is by the intention, or as Thomas Aquinas described it, the end result of the action taken. What was the EMT's goal when he performed this action? How did it work out for him? These are both things that will help you come to conclusions on the second qualification. The last way to figure this out is by looking at the circumstances surrounding the action. You have to look at what other factors came into play when the EMT made his decision so you can see why he did what he did and gain a better understanding of it. This is almost like putting yourself in the EMT's shoes. Looking at the actions performed by the EMT show how we can decipher whether this is a good or bad action and how to affect the other people involved. It is crucial to look at the bigger picture in scenarios like this and to analyze deeper to make sure that the actions taken were good. Another very important concept to look at when analyzing a situation like this is the principle of double effect. This principle or doctrine of double effect is a way to look at your actions when a good act is not able to be separated from an intrinsically evil one. The principle of double effect explains what to do if you want to or are going to do something morally good, but it has a morally bad side effect attached to it. It tells us that it is morally and ethically fine to go through with the action, assuming that the bad side effect was not intended.
This even applies if you saw that the bad action could have happened, but you knew that the good action would also work. In the case of this car crash, the principle of double effect might come into play when you are choosing who to save. With the secret lover more likely to survive than your wife, the principle of double effect explains that doing one good act, such as saving the secret lover, may result in a bad one, such as your spouse dying. It's important to look at this situation logically, and that you have a better chance of saving the secret lover than you do the spouse, which is where this principle of double effect comes into play. After looking at and analyzing the scenario, the principle of double effect, the different parts to a moral act, and the different possible outcomes that could come from the situation, I've come to the conclusion that it makes more sense to attempt to save the secret lover than your spouse. In the scenario here, the wife is very unlikely to pull through and live, compared to the secret lover who has a much better shot. I came to this conclusion by looking at the principle of double effect and how this would affect the EMT's decision to choose the secret lover over the spouse. I also looked at the three parts of a moral act and how the two primary and one secondary considerations would lead the EMT to this decision. Even though the EMT is not going to be friends or like the man that he's going to save, the morally correct act that the Catholic Church would want us to perform in this situation would be to save him over your wife. He has a better chance to pull through than your wife, so you have to make the tough call to put him over her. Attempting to save your wife will most likely result in both of the victims dying. Meanwhile, attempting to save him will most likely result in you having saved a life. The outcome from saving the secret lover is the better choice of the two based on the principles that we have learned in this course so far and the path that the church would hope we would take.